Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio. So today, we are looking at a Liepard card, which could actually be sneaky, sneaky good, ladies and gentlemen. You want to stick around for this one? This one could be kind of a bit of a sleeper card. Now, being a dark Pokemon means you're not really hitting anything for weakness, but it's not a huge deal. As a side note, how beautiful is the artwork on this card? I love the art on this card. Retreat cost of 1 is really good because the main attack you're using is for a single energy, so being able to then retreat for that energy is good. Although do remember that if you're playing dark energy, you can roll with Altar of the Moon to give yourself free retreats here, should you so wish. The weakness to fighting is a little bit of a pain because we've got things like Lichen Rock and Mars Shadows coming out in the near future, and as I've said in a bunch of videos, with Darkrai Drampa running around and Zoroark, people are going to be playing fighting Pokemon to counter them. They'll end up countering you as well. Resistance to Psychic is fun because, as I say, probably far too often, resistance is always good. Although 90 HP is low, you do at least get to use Level Ball to search out Liepard. There's nothing worse than a 100 HP Pokemon. Low HP and you can't use Level Ball? No thank you, ladies and gentlemen. No thank you. Now the second attack I'm going to deal with very, very briefly here. It's not particularly good. Dark and a colourless, 60 damage. It just doesn't do enough damage, to be perfectly honest, ladies and gentlemen. 2 energy, 60 damage is not particularly great. If you had a choice band, it goes up to 90. Professor Kukui, it goes up to 110. And you know what? 220 is not even enough to KO any of your Stage 2 GXs. When you're not even 2-hit KOing Stage 2 GXs, it's not great. But the thing I really want to point out is that the Darkrai from Breakpoint, one of your best dark Pokemon we've got at the moment, he does 60 for 2 energy with Dark Pulse. Except you can then add to that, and he's a basic. You get where I'm going with this. It's not a good attack, it's not the reason why you would use it, but that's okay. That's not why I'm calling Liepard an interesting sleeper card. It's because of the attack Torment. 1 energy, 30 damage is nothing to write home about. But you also get to choose one of the defending Pokemon's attacks, and that Pokemon cannot use that attack during your opponent's next turn. So you basically get to stop your opponent using an attack. Now don't get me wrong, ladies and gentlemen, there are ways around this. Your opponent can play a Pokemon Ranger to get rid of that effect, although to be perfectly honest, who's still playing Pokemon Ranger at the moment? I've seen a lot of deck lists lately, and honestly, very, very few good deck lists are still playing Pokemon Ranger. Maybe they will if Torment gets big, but they're not at the moment. The thing they're more likely to do is just switch into another Pokemon, retreat into another Pokemon. But that's only if they can switch or retreat. And if they've got something to switch or retreat into. And if they've got sufficient energy for that Pokemon into whom they are switching or retreating. And if all of that is true, then fine. But that's not often going to be the case. If you're facing down a Volcanion EX with free energy, how often is your opponent going to have a second free energy Volcanion EX ready to go? So, what I really want to do in this video is try and convince you that this is an interesting card. So what I thought we would do, now we've gone through the basics, is take a look at a whole bunch of Pokemon that could be useful in the current format, Pokemon that are seeing a fair bit of play, and see how they would be affected by Torment. First of all, Taboo Cocoa. Because what we're also going to do here is we're going to look at the ones that will and won't be affected, and then we're going to see if they've got any ways around this. The promo Taboo Cocoa, for a double colourless energy, does 20 damage to all of your Pokemon. Now, they've also got a second attack for 2 lightning and a colourless that does 110. But most decks aren't playing lightning energy with Taboo Cocoa. Even something like Vikavolt Tapu Bulu, which is only playing something like 3 or 4 lightning energy. It's very difficult to get this second attack going. So you can sit there and use Torment, and then there will be no flying flip. Now, of course, your opponent can always just retreat into something else, and if they do, fine. But they're not always going to have something good to retreat into, and that's going to be an awful lot of fun. Although do remember what they could do is retreat and then switch, and then the defending Pokemon didn't have Torment used on it the previous turn, because the defending Pokemon is different. If you switch to the bench and come forward, you are treated as a new defending Pokemon. How about Tapu Bulu GX? Now, Tapu Bulu GX has got a really good GX attack, a very weak attack that does 30 for 1 energy, and then Nature's Judgment, which is the good attack on Tapu Bulu. So let's assume they've used their GX attack here. If you use Torment to turn off Nature's Judgment, they're using Horn Attack, which means they're free hit KOing you. But with a Choice Band, you're doing 60 and you're free hit KOing them. Except in theory, you hit them first, and by the time they've done 60 damage to you, you've gotten a KO and taken 2 prizes off of Tapu Bulu. And let's say they haven't used their GX attack. Well, you can force them to use their GX attack to KO a 90 HP tech Pokemon. I am okay with that, ladies and gentlemen. Now again, maybe your opponent can use Vikavolt to set up a second Tapu Bulu and retreat into a second Tapu Bulu, fine. But maybe they can't. Or maybe you can play something like a Hex Maniac to turn off their abilities. And certainly if you're using something like Liepard, I would recommend playing something like Garbodor or multiple Hex Maniac, because a lot of the ways your opponent is going to try and get around this is using abilities. Things like Vikavolt to get more energy on, or even if it ever sees any play, something like Solgaleo to get a free switch every turn. So if you can turn that off, that's quite good. Let's go through a few more. Volcanion EX has 1 attack. So if you use Torment to turn that attack off, Volcanion EX cannot attack the following turn. How about Baby Volcanion, hey Nick, which has Power Heater, which is a really good 1 energy attack, which sets you up, and Steam Artillery, which uses free energy and is overpriced. You can force your opponent to put free energy on a Volcanion to get the KO. Now, don't get me wrong, they can do that, but it means that they're not using Power Heater that they want to, and that's a good thing. Metagross GX only has 1 damage-dealing attack. Sure, they can use Algorithm, but again, you're forcing them to use their GX attack earlier than they want to. And then, of course, Giga Hammer, well, they can't use it. But not unlike with Vikavolt Bulu, they can use Geotech System to recover the energy onto a second Metagross to attack. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Liepard really does combo very nicely with something like Garbodor. How about Tapu Lele? Sure, you've got the GX attack, but it doesn't do any damage. So you use Torment on a Tapu Lele and all of a sudden they can't use that attack next turn. How about Vespiquen? Vespiquen's got 1 good attack and 1 attack that does a paltry 10 damage. So you use Torment to turn off Bee Revenge and gutted Vespiquen. Although just like with Tapu Cocoa, they do have free retreat, and as it's a single energy attack, there is a decent chance they're going to be able to retreat into a second Vespiquen, or even use something like a Zoroark to stand in, which again is another reason to play Garbodor. Although as a side note here, those decks are often just playing 4 double colourless energy, so it's not a given they're going to be able to draw into another double colourless to attack. How about Zoroark? Zoroark's got 1 attack, so if you use Torment, they can't attack. Although ironically they could use Zoroark Break to copy your Torment, to use Torment, so that you can't use Torment the following turn. How about Drampa? Drampa's very much like Tapu Bulu. They've got an attack that isn't Berserk, but it only does 20 damage. And that sounds okay to me. And finally, Decidueye only has 1 attack. You can turn that off. But do remember, ladies and gentlemen, that they can use Feather Arrow. When I say attack, I know they've got Hollow Hunt. I mean damage-dealing attack. And hopefully by now, I've laid out quite nicely how this card works. There are plenty of ways around it. But there are many, many Pokemon in the current format that only have 1 good attack. So if you Torment so they can't use it, that really puts them in a bind. Now maybe they can retreat, maybe they can find another Pokemon, but you know what? Maybe they can't. And you're buying turns with free damage. Although, like I've said, a lot of the ways around this revolve around abilities, so consider Garbodor. The other thing you may, of course, wish to consider is Vileplume, because, of course, your opponent may want to use a Floatstone to retreat or a switch or something along those lines. So what you can do is play it with Vileplume so that they cannot use any of their items, and so they can't get set up. So rather than using Garbodor to turn off something like Metagross's ability and Vikavolt ability, you're just trying to take advantage of Vileplume so they never get the ability rolling in the first place. Maybe this will be a bit too clunky. Maybe there are too many ways around it. But I'm hoping that through all of my examples I've shown that there are many, many decks you can take advantage of here, and it's got to be worth looking at using as a tech in some dark decks, or even anything playing Rainbow Energy. And for that reason, I am going to be giving this 3 Wassies. So much fun, many ways around. Give it a test. Now, if you disagree, there is a comment section. Go nuts, be nice. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter @TheWassie, and tonight at 8 PM there's going to be some streaming action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. Come and join in. Also Thursday at 8 PM, that's UK time. And if you do want to support the pod, you can do so at patreon.com/PTCGRadio. The most important thing as always, look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.